Everyone, welcome back to my channel. Something a little bit different today. I decided to do a little video on how to choose your planners and your planning setup for next year. I'm very aware that it's Hobonichi preview time. Some companies have already started releasing their 2024 planners, and if you're anything like me, you're probably doing lots of thinking around what planners do I want for next year, getting drawn in by all the newness and craziness and kind of going, oh my god, I want everything. I have a little kind of way that I plan my planners effectively that I've been doing for a few years now, so I thought it would be probably a good time to kind of take you through my little system and hopefully kind of guide you if you are kind of in that mix of, oh my god, I want everything, to hopefully kind of help you streamline actually, you know, what you actually want for next year and help you identify what's a necessity, what's a, you know, what's a nice to have, and what's a you just want it because it's brand new and you want all the newness. Okay, so how I thought I would do this video is I would kind of write out my method that I have been using for a couple of years, kind of talk you through it step by step, show you some of the examples of what I've been doing for this year. So I have been spending a lot of time thinking about my 2024 planners, so there's a few spreads in my cousin and in my bullet journal which I will show you through to kind of demonstrate some of the elements. And yeah, it'll just be kind of a chatty, this is how I do it, an explanation of this, because this is quite, you know, top line. But if there is anything that I don't cover or anything that you know, want a little bit more info on, please just drop me a comment. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions or help any way I can, beyond helping you decide what you actually want for next year, because at this point, although I have a plan for next year, it's already changed 3 times, so it may change again. Okay, so step 1, review current setup. So this is something that I did pre One Book July. If you haven't seen my One Book July videos, I do recommend watching them. They were incredibly invaluable for me in terms of actually helping make some of these decisions for next year and kind of help me kind of really figure out what was important to me in terms of planning, just as a side note. But yeah, this is an example of something that I did pre going into the bullet journal, and it literally was just a list of the planners and how I'm using them. Side note, in this kind of part of my planner planning, I haven't talked about my file of facts at any point. So I have a personal file of facts that just has the same setup year in, year out, because it's basically just a reference binder. So it's got kind of perpetual calendar, shop notes, things like that. So I know that I'm going to kind of stick in that. So this process is purely for my other kind of day-to-day, weekly planners and actual like planning things, just as an aside. So this was the plans that I was using at that moment in time, and it was just a good starting point in terms of really reviewing, you know, am I actually using all of these elements? Is there any duplication? Is it working? Is it not working? Etc. Really good to get it down on paper and just have that objective view. Just, you know, for the first time, sit down and go, okay, what am I actually using all these planners for, and is it working? And this is probably something that I'll do at certain points throughout the year, particularly if I'm kind of getting a bit of an itchy feet time. If there's a new planner that I've seen, you know, pop up on Instagram, I'll kind of come back and do this and do it as a way of kind of solidifying to myself that actually my planner system works right now. I don't need to add a new planner into the mix. I've got everything that I need. It's working well. There's no cons, etc. Or any cons that I do have, they're not going to be solved by this, you know, shiny new planner. So yeah, highly recommend doing this. If you do nothing else in terms of my method, at least just kind of write down what your planners currently are, what they're doing for you, and how it's going. Number 2 and number 3 can be swapped around quite easily, and sometimes I will find that I do kind of do these in slightly different orders. There's no kind of, you know, set way, but for the purposes of this video, number 2 is what do I need from my planners. So I have got kind of a couple of examples. So one of the things that I do when I'm kind of setting out planners for next year is just do a quick list of what do I want out of my planners, you know, what am I using them for. It will generally be quite a simple list, but also it's a really good way of kind of catching if there's anything you've been using your planners for that actually you don't really need or want, and it's just kind of habit. So it's really good to kind of go through and, you know, list out what am I using all of my planners for, and then kind of have a separate view of, well, actually, what do I want my planners to do? And it has happened where I've found things that actually I've been doing that they're not working for me, or actually I don't need them in my life and they're just adding excess fuss or, you know, whatever. And so yeah, it's a small part of it, but I highly recommend it. Related to that is kind of a bit of a requirements list. So I tend to do these as two separate pieces. This is kind of my like framework, my top level, okay, what do I need out of planners? I then kind of take that and kind of apply it a little bit more broadly and start thinking about kind of things like sizes and layout. So my EDC, for example, it needs to be small enough to fit in a handbag. My main planner needs to have notes pages because I don't just want planning pages, I do need extra bits at the back for common placing or budget planning, things like that. And it's just, you know, kind of expanding this bit out and adding a bit more detail to it, so you've got a bit more of a kind of clearer framework to kind of review planners against. I've kind of split them out in terms of categories of planning. It doesn't necessarily mean that I want 5 planners. This is just kind of how I've decided to kind of bucket up the different parts of planning that I do. But yeah, you might want to kind of do this all in one or do this in a slightly different way, but just kind of having that, again, objective view of, well, what do I need out of my planners? How big do they need to be? What layouts work for me? Rings, strings, bound. This is kind of the time to kind of have a look at that. This is kind of a small kind of abridged version that I basically kind of recreated for the video, because what I actually did this on was my iPad and it is illegible because I wrote it with my pencil. So hopefully that just gives you a bit of an idea of what you're kind of looking out for, what you're making notes of, just to kind of give you a bit of a, okay, almost a bit of a shopping list of, okay, I need a planner for this, a planner for this, but actually I found a planner that can do both of these, etc. Next up, we have step 3, which might initially look like a bit of repetition because it's what do I own already, so a list of specs and pros and cons. You might look at that and go, hang on a second, we've already done that in review current setup. And to an extent there can be some repetition, but actually this is also a really good time to bring in any other planners that you have, you know, so like Filofaxes or Traveller's Notebooks and things like that, that potentially you have to one side and may just need to buy new inserts for, but aren't currently in your current setup. It's a really good time to kind of just sit and review those really, as well as what you currently have, and do a bit more of a, you know, typical pros and cons on everything that you own planner wise, because actually you may find that there is something like, say, a Filofax that you haven't used in a couple of years, and actually, you know, from looking at your requirements list, you go, well, actually the main planner could be perfect in a Filofax because you can obviously put notes pages in there. There's a whole heap of layouts available because there's loads of printable ones on Etsy, or you can just make your own. So actually the Filofax that I have, you know, disregarded for a few years might bring back into the fold. It might actually work. This is the time to kind of have those little realizations just by plotting out every single planner. You can also do this for not necessarily planners that you own anymore, but maybe planners that you've used previously. Kind of go back and revisit them. So like a take a note planner, if you tried that one year like I did, actually don't forget about that, maybe make a note of it and go, well, actually, could that work for what I'm using or what I want to use my planner for now? Again, this is just a bit of an example page because I haven't necessarily done that. I've kind of kept it to my 4 main ones, partly because, again, I did some kind of planning on the notes pages of my iPad, but also partly because I know that a Filofax doesn't work for me for regular planning. I've tried many times. It's not a thing. Again, take a note, my planning hasn't changed too much since last year when I decided to ditch the take a note, so I don't need to necessarily review that, but you might find that there are a couple of planners that you've kind of previously discarded or just sat gathering dust on your shelf. Also, as kind of a side note, you may do this process and go, actually, this Filofax, this TN, whatever it is, I'm keeping it for no good reason, and this might give you the little shove to actually go on and sell it on, destash it, make a bit of money, and also kind of, you know, relieve some of the possessions, because that's one thing that I've made a big conscious effort of this year, to get rid of planners and pens and things like that that actually I'm not using. I'm trying to sell on whatever I know I'm not going to be using again in the medium term because it's just taking up space. I don't like the fact that it's sat there gathering dust and no one's loving it, so I'm passing it on where I can. This might give you the opportunity to do just that. Finally, we're going to talk about what new planners interest me. This is really good if you, like me, get caught up on all the new releases, see everything on Facebook and Instagram and go, oh yeah, I definitely could be involved in a B6 Sterling ink. That probably will be perfect for me. Well, it may be, but also maybe you need to just kind of make a note of it and do a bit of a pros and cons and do the same process that you've kind of already done for your current planners and just for all the new stuff, and really kind of dig into, do you actually need it? And this is something that I do every time I see a planner that I get very involved in and start, you know, watching on the YouTube channel, watching on the YouTube videos about it and looking at Instagram. I kind of do a bit of a hang on a second, what's the reality of this planner? Does it mash up with actually what I want out of a planner? And kind of, it 9 times out of 10 it does help me talk myself out of it. So highly recommend, if there are some planners that you are kind of looking at for next year, if there's a pre-order open and you're like, oh, should I, shouldn't I, do this little process in the same way that you've done for your current planners, and you'll probably find that it's probably not the planner for you, or you'll find it's perfect and it, you know, works out brilliantly for you. But definitely kind of have that time to really objectively think about it. And that's kind of it in terms of the steps. Like I say, you can do these in pretty much any order. It does help to kind of keep the pieces of work, it makes it sound like it's kind of homework. It does, you know, it's better to keep it separate in terms of you kind of review your current planner setup in isolation from what you need from a planner, just to kind of have that objective time and, you know, not look through the lens of, oh, but I love my weeks and therefore I'm just going to keep using it. Well, actually no, take a step back, actually look at, what do you need from a planner? The weeks might not be the right one. Just because you love the designs doesn't mean that you should be using a planner that doesn't quite fit your needs or your specifications. So now we've kind of done all of that, and we've kind of got all of our notes made, and if they're anything like me, they're probably spread across a load of different books. But when we've kind of got to that point, we can then start moving into the fun bit of then actually looking at making a list of the planners that you want for next year and what you're going to use each of them for, because that's a real key thing. Don't just kind of write a list of, this is my shopping list. Actually make a point of writing out what you're going to be using each of them for, just to help as that second check of, actually, is this the right planner? And what you may find is that it does change over time. So my original list was just 3 planners, and then I kind of wrote it and then went away for a couple of weeks and then came back and reviewed it and went, actually, I've realised that I need some sort of A5 planner. I don't think I could cope not having something to use as kind of a notes or commonplace, or just something with all of my kind of catch-all for the year, because although I'd written Weeks Mega, I knew that those pages weren't going to be big enough, and it was going to probably annoy me with the Weeks Mega being so thick. And yeah, so definitely do this and then kind of think on it for a couple of weeks and come back to it and make sure that you're still happy with it. That's what I did, and I changed up my setup. I mean, I think this is probably number 3 or 4 of the iteration, and this one I did a couple of weeks ago now, and I'm still looking at it and going, yeah, no, this is right. So I'm thinking this is probably going to be the final one. But yeah, it's a few more planners than the original one, although the original one didn't have the Filofax, because like I say, it was always a bit of a given. But yeah, what I've added in is basically a cousin day free, because I need, like I say, something A5. Everything else is pretty much kind of as it was on that original list. And that's kind of it. This was probably really rambly, and you're probably watching it and thinking, I still don't really know. Hopefully not. But like I say, if you do have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Hopefully this was useful. Hopefully, you know, even if you just do certain elements of it, you may find that it just helps kind of guide you into your decisions for next year, and you don't, you know, go winding up buying all the planners and then realizing that none of them work for you. I've been there, I've done it, which is why I now do this. But yeah, hopefully you enjoyed watching, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.